Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 5. I'm not sure why the screen has the slide in kind of small mode, why it doesn't display a larger size. I don't know why that's happening, so hopefully you have printed off the slides and you can follow along easier than looking at the screen. Okay, so Chapter 5 deals with, or it's called consumer behavior. And it deals with the decision-making process consumers use when buying stuff and the influences on that process. Okay, so oops. There we go. Gotta go to blue. Okay. Okay, so we have five steps in the consumer decision-making process, so-called problem recognition, information search, so it's information search for solutions to the problem, evaluation of alternatives, the actual purchase decision, and then so-called post-purchase behavior. And then we look at three variations on that five-step model. Sometimes we take shortcuts. So when we're making so-called routine purchases, we sometimes take shortcuts instead of going through the full 5 steps. And then we tend to use the full 5 steps for so-called extended problem solving. And then we have an intermediate version called limited problem solving. And then we have a list of 4 different types of influences on the consumer purchase decision process. We have situational influences, we have psychological influences, we have socio-cultural influences, and then we have the influences of the marketing mix, otherwise known as the 4 Ps, and we deal with the influence of the marketing mix in chapters 10 through 18, but we do deal with the rest of them in this chapter. Okay. Okay, so the focus of chapter 5 deals with why somebody buys one product rather than another, and how people make choices during the buying process, and how companies use their understanding of the consumer behavior in their marketing activities. So consumer behavior is defined as a person's actions during the purchase process, and it includes the mental and social processes both before and after the purchase transaction. So in the introduction of this chapter, the book has an interesting example of how different customers use slightly different processes when buying the same product. And so we have an example of men and women using different processes to evaluate a vehicle purchase when they're shopping for a vehicle. So on the product feature of styling, men tend to look at the exterior appearance, whereas women tend to look at more of the interior features, such as what the view is or what the vision is from inside the vehicle and how much storage capacity it has. When evaluating a vehicle on the speed factor, men tend to look at acceleration in absolute terms, whereas women tend to look at speed in relative terms. Is the vehicle going to be fast enough to get out of congested traffic? And when the two genders look at the vehicle in terms of its safety features, men look at the safety features in terms of helping to prevent accidents, whereas women look at the safety features in terms of helping to survive accidents. And then the shopping approach is slightly different. Men tend to focus on what they require, and then they go searching for a vehicle, whereas women kind of do things the opposite way. They kind of see what's available, and then they seek out the views of others. Okay, so we have this 5-step consumer purchase decision process, and the first step in the sequence is so-called need recognition or problem recognition, and it's simply the recognition that our current state differs from the desired state we wish to have. So I'm thirsty. I want to satisfy my thirst. Therefore, I've recognized my thirst as a quote-unquote problem. Okay, then the second stage is searching through information to find solutions to the problem, and we can either look for information internally, so we can scan our memory for prior experience with the product, or okay, and then we also have external search. So if our own personal experience doesn't give us enough information to solve the problem, then we can look outside ourselves for additional information. Or if the purchase involves a high amount of risk, if we're buying something expensive and we make a mistake, then there's a high risk involved. So then we'll go out and use external sources of information. Or if the cost of gathering information is low, then we might also use external sources of information as well. So we have three external sources of information: personal sources, or friends and trusted relatives; marketers themselves by looking at their advertising, sales materials, and their salespeople; and then sometimes we have public sources. Some products have public product ratings that we can consult to help us decide. Okay, the third step in the sequence here is evaluating the alternatives. So in the second step, we go out and look at possible solutions, and then in the third stage, we evaluate the possible solutions to a problem. And the evaluation phase has three components. One is the creation of a so-called awareness set. So it's the group of alternative products or brands that are capable of solving your problem. We also uncover evaluation criteria. So these are objective or subjective criteria used for comparing products. And finally, we sift through the bigger group, the awareness set, and we come up with a short list of candidate products known as the consideration set, and we make our final decision from out of the consideration set. Okay, then the fourth step is actually making the purchase decision. So we select one of the items from the consideration set, and what we might decide to buy can be influenced by any number of things. If the vendor might have a sale on a certain product, we might have prior experience with a particular vendor, so we're comfortable with them. The vendor might, or the product might have a return policy that we find attractive, or there might just be some other situational factors that kick in. Maybe there's a sale on, maybe the store atmosphere that we experience when we're shopping we find enjoyable, maybe the salesperson is persuasive, maybe we're under time pressure, we have to buy, we need gas for our vehicle, so we just go to the first gas station, we don't really shop around very much. Anyways, there's a bunch of factors influencing the actual decision itself. And then finally, the fifth step is the post-purchase behavior. Oops, I need to clear that. Post-purchase behavior. I think it was on the wrong side. So this is where our mind compares our actual experience with the product with the one that we originally expected. And so we have some measure of satisfaction, we have some degree of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So we may ask ourselves, why are vendors, why are marketers so concerned about the level of satisfaction that a consumer derives from their product? And there's two reasons. One is we know that the most effective form of advertising is word of mouth. And what that means is that if a consumer is satisfied with their product, they go out and tell other people. And statistics show that a satisfied consumer tells 3 other people, and dissatisfied customers tell 9 other people. So marketers and vendors are concerned about consumer satisfaction because they're trying to prevent them getting a negative reputation, and the purchaser telling these 9 other people to stay away from the product. So marketers want to minimize dissatisfaction in addition to maximizing satisfaction. Okay, then the second reason marketers are so concerned about the level of satisfaction obtained by a purchaser is because satisfied customers tend to become repeat customers. And it's a whole lot less expensive marketing to a repeat customer than trying to find a new one. Okay, so part of the post-purchase behavior stage of the consumer purchase decision process is something known as cognitive dissonance, and the book describes it as post-purchase anxiety. It means having second thoughts about the product that we've purchased. Sometimes, you buy a pair of clothing and then you get home and you say, geez, it fits, but I'm not so sure about the color or the design on it, or maybe I paid too much. So having second thoughts is known as cognitive dissonance. And marketers have any number of little tactics they use to try to enhance customer satisfaction and to reduce cognitive dissonance. So some of the ones mentioned in this chapter are the vendor having an easy return policy or easy refund policy, having 1-800 toll-free numbers for customers to get customer service from the vendor, the vendor having people on hand to deal with customer complaints. And then another one that we'll come back to in chapter 17 is marketers can engage in or practice reinforcement advertising, which reassures buyers that they've made the right choice. But we'll come back to that one in chapter 17. Okay, so we have this 5-step process that consumers use when they buy products, and we have 3 variations on that. I'm just trying to find my little button here. We have three variations on that. Oops. We have 3 variations on that because sometimes this 5-step model is just that. It's a model, and sometimes consumers take shortcuts and they skip over some of these prescribed steps. And these 3 variations on the model are based on the concept of involvement. And involvement means the level of importance of the product to the customer. So a product can have importance to us from an economic perspective because maybe the product is very expensive, or from a social perspective because maybe it reflects upon our social status. And we want the recipient to have a favorable impression of us. Okay, so our basic purchase decision process has 5 steps: problem recognition, information search for solutions to the problem, evaluation of alternative solutions, the purchase decision, and then the post-purchase behavior. And so we have three variations in that based on how important the product is to the consumer. So for products that are of low importance, the problem-solving exercise is really a low involvement process. It's also known as routine problem solving, and we use routine problem solving for buying ordinary stuff. So when we're shopping for ordinary stuff, we're shopping for milk, we're shopping for typical foods that we consume, we're looking for gas for our vehicle. We only consider a few brands and a few vendors. We only look at a few product features. I'm getting milk. The product feature that I'm looking at is what's the expiry date on the carton. We expend minimum research time. I don't spend any time looking at the shopping for milk other than looking at the expiry date. and we don't use any external sources of information. So we use it for buying staple kind of products like food and uh, basic household stuff. And then at the other extreme, we have high involvement purchase process, otherwise known as extended problem solving. And we use this, so this is the 5-step process that gets used here. Um, so we use it for important products. So if the product is expensive, or if it has some kind of important social consequences, or if it reflects upon our image in our group of friends and families, then we look at many brands and many sellers. We evaluate the product and many product features. We spend lots of time researching the product, and we're more inclined to use many external sources of information. So if we're looking to buy a vehicle, which tend to be expensive, or buy a house, or we're shopping for holiday vacation or vacation destinations, or we're shopping for gifts for somebody, then we tend to spend more time, and we tend to use this extended problem-solving process. And then in between, we have the medium involvement purchase process, so it's just in between the low and the high, and so we can use a moderate number. We look at a moderate number of brands and sellers. We look at some product features. We spend some research time, and we might use a few external sources of information. And the author suggests that we use this medium involvement or limited problem solving process when you shop for restaurants or low-cost appliances. Okay. So what's the relevance of these different problem-solving processes during the purchase process? What's the relevance to marketers? Well, part of the relevance to marketers is that the marketing strategy that the vendor can use can be adapted to match the degree of involvement in the purchase process. So, for example, if we have low involvement products, if we have a market leading product, then maybe we want our advertising to focus on maintaining the product quality. We want to make sure that the retail stores do not have any stockouts of our product so that customers aren't tempted to try competing brands. And we'll use reinforcement advertising, which we'll come back to in Chapter 17. We use reinforcement advertising to help convince buyers that they've made the right choice. And if we're a newcomer to the product market, and so we have a market challenging product, then maybe we just want to focus our ads on putting the product on the consumer's consideration set, or in the consideration set. And if we have a high involvement product and we have a market leading product, then we want to provide customers with lots of product information through information on our website and through advertising. And if we have a market challenging product, then we want to use comparative advertising so that the shopper can compare the features of our product versus those of competing products. Okay, so the next section starts going into the influences on the 5-step consumer purchase decision process. And so we have these 4 sets of influences on the consumer purchase decision process. So the first one we have our situational influences, and this is dealt with in Chapter 5. And secondly, we have psychological influences, also dealt with in Chapter 5. And then we have sociocultural influences, also dealt with in Chapter 5. And then we have the influence of the marketing mix. This is the influence of the 4 Ps, and this is covered in Chapters 10 through 18. So we'll come back to those ones later. So the book, the rest of this chapter deals mostly with the psychological influences and the sociocultural influences on the consumer purchase decision process, but it makes a brief mention of some situational influences. So some of these situational influences that can affect the consumer purchase decision process is what the purchase task is. Is the product we're buying for personal use or is it a gift? I mean, we have a bit of a tendency to buy more prestigious goods when we're buying gifts for people than when we buy the same type of product for our own use. Another situational influence is the social surroundings at the time we make the purchase. When you buy things when we're shopping alone, we might make slightly different choices than if we buy something while we're with a group of people, because maybe we're then more conscious of what their opinion is. Okay, and it can another situational influence is the physical surroundings. So this is when you go shopping in a store and they have a nice atmosphere. Maybe you spend more time there and you buy more stuff, or maybe the store has no atmosphere and you just get in and get out, spending very little time there. Okay, then there's another situational influence. It's the time of the day. I mean, obviously we're probably more inclined to buy breakfast at a restaurant in the morning as opposed to the afternoon or the evening. You're going to buy a different meal. So the time of the day can also influence what we buy. And our antecedent states. So if you don't have any money, and if you don't have any money with you, then heck, guess what? You're not going to be doing any purchasing unless you have a credit card or you have a debit card or something like that. But so whether or not you have money in your pocket when you're shopping and what your mood is, these are also antecedent states. These are also situational influences that can affect what we buy. Okay, so now we go off to the psychological influences on the consumer purchase decision process. And we have, oops, I need this guy here. Okay, so we have 6 psychological factors that we look at. We have motivation. Whoops, we have motivation. We have personality. We have perception. We have learning. We have learning. We have values, beliefs, and attitudes, and we have lifestyles. So we're going to just walk through all these one by one. Okay, so motivation. So motivation, the book defines as the physiological felt force that drives behavior towards need satisfaction. And there's a little model in the book here. It's a model of need satisfaction, and it comes from a, geez, I don't know what nationality the fellow is. Maybe he's Russian or German. I'm not sure what he is. Anyways, a fellow by the name of Maslow. I don't even know if the book uses the name Maslow, but the guy who developed this hierarchy is called Maslow. And this is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs are right there. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs says humans have different types of needs that are arranged in a hierarchical relationship. And in order to satisfy one need, we need to satisfy needs at the lower levels first. So we have these 5 levels of needs, A, B, C, D, and E. And if we want to satisfy a need at the at level C here, at the social level we have to first satisfy the needs at the base level, our physiological needs, or need for food, water, shelter, and the like. And then after we satisfy these physiological needs, then we can devote our attention to solving our safety needs. So this is our need for shelter, need for financial security, so it's a need for work. And after we've satisfied the needs at these 2 levels, then we can devote our attention to satisfying our needs at this middle level, which are social needs. That's our need for companionship and a sense of a group belonging. And if we want to satisfy higher level needs, well, we have to satisfy the 3 lower level needs first, and then we can move on to satisfying our personal needs. Sometimes it's called the ego or esteem needs. And then finally, our highest level needs are here. They're called self-actualization needs. So it's our need for learning and growth and development. To me, I always like to call this Maslow's stairway to heaven. It's the stairway to heaven model of needs. So this model of motivation that our needs are arranged in a hierarchy, and we can satisfy needs at one level only after we've satisfied the needs at a lower level. This is a model of needs. It's a model of motivation, and it's not necessarily 100% an accurate description of an individual person's needs, because different people have different needs in different intensities. And so some people have stronger safety needs and personal needs. Um, but even though this is a model, and even though it doesn't fully describe everybody all the time, it's still a useful model to have. Models don't have to be right. They don't have to be perfectly right in order to be useful. Okay. Then the next level of psychological factor that influences the consumer purchase decision process is is personality. And personality, I mean, it's kind of a tough thing to define. It says the book defines it as consistent behavior or motivational responses. And the concept of personality can apply both to people, individual persons, and to countries, or I guess we should say nations, whatever. So in individual people, we know that different people have different personalities. We have different degrees of introversion and extroversion, different degrees of assertiveness and passivity, different degrees of compliance and rebelliousness, different degrees of dominance and submission. And the book gives us an interesting example of marketers taking advantage of some of these personal differences or these personality differences. They tell us that aggressive type personalities like branded goods in order to show their status. So the concept of personality also applies to nations or to countries, and we know that Canadians tend to have a bit of a reputation of being polite people. We also have a reputation of being hockey crazy, and Americans have a reputation of being more aggressive, especially more aggressive than Canadians, and more innovative. Lots of the big innovative technology companies come out of the United States. Apple, Tesla, Google, Amazon, for example. They're all American based. Okay, then another related concept of personality is the concept of self-concept. And so our personality characteristics get reflected in how we see ourselves and how we believe other people see us. So there's two aspects to this concept of self-concept: how we actually are and how we like to see ourselves. And marketers take advantage of that in their advertising. And we're all familiar with this. So I have a couple of examples here. So in late 2015, there was a new James Bond movie that came out. Let me just find it here. There's a new James Bond movie that came out, and the Omega Watch Company, I presume that they paid to have their watch worn in the movie, but marketers know that guys like to think of themselves as James Bond. Guys like to think of ourselves as these heroes that can save the world from some kind of destruction. And so guys look at themselves as James Bond type of personalities, and so marketers use our self-image to try to market these expensive watches to us. And of course, women are not immune to this either. Women I see there's a recent ad from Emirates Airlines, and the star of the ad is Jennifer Aniston. And women like to think of themselves as Jennifer Aniston type people. They like to think that they're attractive and witty like the Jennifer Anistons of the world. So marketers use our self-concept, or can use our self-concept for their marketing purposes. Okay, let's go back. Oops. Okay, so the next psychological influence on the consumer purchase decision process is perception. Perception. Oh my goodness. Where did it go? Oh my goodness. There we go. There's perception. Okay, so perception is the selection, organization, and interpretation of information into a meaningful picture. Because different people have different views of the same thing. So we've seen a good example of different people having different views of the same thing in the introduction to this chapter when we have men and women shopping for a vehicle. They're looking at the same vehicle, but they assess the same physical vehicle on product features in a slightly different way. So when we see an object, when we see a physical thing, we see not only the physical properties of this thing, but we also see our subjective interpretation of the thing, of the properties. And our brains engage in selective perception because our brain gets overwhelmed by information. So the brain sort of filters through the information to selectively perceive it and to make it more manageable. And there's four aspects to selective perception. One is selective exposure. So this means that consumers like you and I, when we're shopping for stuff, when we're kind of keeping an eye on the world, we tend to get our information from a limited number of information sources. So if we only use a limited number of information sources to find out about what's happening in the world or what products are available, then marketers need to know which information sources that you or I are using so they can place their promotional material in those communications media so it will reach our attention. So we have the selective exposure to messages. And then another aspect of selective perception is selective attention, which means that we only focus on certain kinds of messages at a time. And we're all kind of familiar with this. You know, let's say you have an interest in buying a vehicle, and you've decided to buy a pickup of some sort. So once you've decided to buy a pickup, and now you start looking for pickups, you probably start noticing advertisements for pickups. You didn't notice these advertisements for pickups before when you didn't have the desire to buy a pickup, but now that you're interested in a pickup, now you start noticing all these ads for them. So that's selective attention. And then we have a selective comprehension. So we interpret information that reinforces existing beliefs. So there's a fun example in the book. It's the Toro appliance company. They came up with a snowblower a number of years ago, and they called it a snow pup. And people didn't buy it because it had the connotation that it didn't have a lot of power. And so they kind of misnamed that product. Another example of a selective comprehension is in the world of pharmaceuticals, many new drugs that come on the market have names, drug names, that begin with the letter X. Oops, going the wrong way. Sorry, X and Z. Why do pharmaceutical companies name their products with X or Z in the initial position? Why do they do that? It's because we humans, or at least we English-speaking humans, we think that um, drug names beginning with X or Z, um, well, they are unique because we don't have that many words in the English language beginning with X or Z, so it makes the brand name stand out. But secondly, marketing experts say they make these product names memorable, make them unique, and they're fricative, which I think means it implies that the product doesn't experience friction. So it means that the drugs act quickly. It's the psychology of pharmaceutical names. Anyways, it's an example of selective comprehension. Uh, okay, and then oops. Okay, and then the fourth component of selective perception is selective retention. We all know that we're so overwhelmed by information on a regular basis that we can't remember everything that we take in. So marketers help to remind us about their product features by giving us samples, by giving us brochures, um, so we can consult them afterwards. Oops. Okay, and then in this section we also deal with in perception. We have the concept of perceived risk. So perceived risk is it's a physiological state of anxiety about the negative consequences of a purchase, and so perceived risk applies more to products to high involvement purchases, high involvement problem solving, and so the greater the risk associated with the purchase, the greater our information surge. So marketers try to reduce the level of perceived risk with products by providing samples. So instead of buying a full bottle of shampoo, they give us a little test bottle. Instead of buying a whole great big box of cereal, we can buy a smaller box, or they'll give us a smaller sample box. And the example in the book is Mary Kay marketing its perfumes by giving perfume samples. So you don't have to spend all this money on a big bottle of perfume. You can just try a little freebie to start with. So marketers can also reduce perceived risk by giving us detailed use instructions, by providing warranties and guarantees, and maybe also by using third-party approvals. So in this case of this cat litter in the book, we have the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, which because it's a new brand of cat litter and we don't recognize it, we might feel more comfortable trying this product on the basis of this third-party kind of stamp of approval. Okay, then the next little section is still talking about perception as a psychological influence on the consumer purchase decision process. The book talks a little bit about subliminal advertising. There's a little blurb there, and I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of the information that the book has provided about this topic. So subliminal advertising is based on the concept of subliminal perception, and it's the view that in addition to us perceiving marketing messages consciously, we can somehow also perceive marketing messages unconsciously. And the book doesn't tell us whether or not subliminal advertising works or not. And so I went out and found some information about this. The information I found comes from a Canadian source. It's a Canadian a fellow who's been in the marketing business in Canada for several decades, and he wrote a book about marketing, and he wrote a book, and part of the book deals with the topic of subliminal advertising. The book is called The Age of Persuasion by Terry O'Reilly. And he says subliminal advertising is a hoax, doesn't exist, never did exist, and it never did exist. And the concept of subliminal advertising originated back in the 1950s. Back in the 1950s, there was this fellow who claimed to put these very brief images in movie theaters, inserted very brief images in the movies that were 1/3000th of a second long, encouraging people to quote unquote drink Coke and eat popcorn. And he claimed that these very brief ads that were imperceptible to the human eye, he said this had a tremendous impact on sales of Coke and sales of popcorn. But it turns out that this was all a hoax, and nobody was able to verify these claims. No one was able to verify these claims. Okay, so a movie theater trade magazine found at the location where this experiment, which theater this experiment was supposed to have happened in, and the owner of the theater, the manager of the theater, said that no such experiment actually took place. And an engineer at RCA, I guess Records, or RCA TV said TV technology at the time, which is 1957, was incapable of carrying messages that were only 1/3000th of a second long. And then another fellow, this doctor, I don't know what he's a doctor of, he tried to duplicate this experiment with subliminal advertising, and he found that there was no evidence that people reacted to such very brief messages. And so the conclusion is zero perception equals zero response, which means subliminal messages have no known effect on human behavior. So personally, I think this is correct. You'll notice that our book just kind of mentions the topic. If the authors of the book thought that subliminal advertising was effective, I think there would be a whole chapter about it, and there's not, so that tells me it doesn't work. But I have to admit, even though we don't seem to be able to perceive marketing messages that are only 1/3000th of a second long, I do know that psychologically we are wired to, or instinctively, we are wired to perceive very brief images of things that we're afraid of. It's kind of an innate part of our DNA. And there are studies that show that if you're shown very, very brief images of snakes or spiders at a level that you don't even realize that you're seeing those pictures, we start getting anxious, and we don't know why, but it's because we've subliminally perceived those images of things that we're instinctively afraid of. But there's a difference between perceiving something we're instinctively afraid of and perceiving images encouraging us to buy Coca-Cola and popcorn. One's a consumer purchase decision, and the other is instinct. Anyways, we do have we can have very brief perceptions, subliminal perceptions, but not of marketing messages. At least that's my understanding. Okay, so I'll continue on here. So the sixth psychological influence on the consumer purchase decision process is learning. So we know that we can learn to like things, and we have two types of learning. We have cognitive learning, and we have behavioral learning. I guess I have these upside down. I should change those. Anyways, so cognitive learning is learning from thinking and reasoning without any direct consumption experience. And so marketers like to, or advertisers like to train us into learning what the meaning of a particular brand is. And I think in the book there's some examples of medical companies training us to learn what their pills do, their headache pills or whatever they are. We learn to associate a brand name with a particular problem solution, headache pill. Okay, the other kind of learning we have is behavioral learning, and this is where we have these automatic responses. We're trained to have these automatic or habitual responses to repeated exposures to cues. And really what this is, and Alex has layman's psychology, it's rat training. It's rat training for humans. So, and there's four components of this rat training for humans, or four components of behavioral learning. We have a drive, so it's a motivation. We have a cue, which is a stimulus that brings the product to our attention. There's a response, and then there's a reinforcement. So, it's like the example in the book. This Pavlov guy, another psychologist that researched behavioral learning. He trained a dog to salivate by ringing a bell every time this Pavlov guy gave the dog food. The dog would start to salivate, and Pavlov would start to ring this bell. And then soon enough, he could take the food away, and just by ringing the bell, the dog would start to salivate. So that's what behavioral learning is. Marketers training us to think that we desire Tim Hortons coffee when we see the ad on TV. So even if we just see a brief image of a Tim Hortons coffee or Tim Hortons restaurant, we start to crave the coffee. It's because we've been subject to behavioral learning. We've been rat trained to want that. Okay, the book talks a little bit about brand loyalty. So brand loyalty is having a favorable attitude or purchase disposition towards a particular brand. And buying something on the basis of brand is really just buying something on the basis of habit. And why do we buy things on the basis of habit? Why do we buy brands? It's because they help reduce perceived risk. If we keep buying the same brand of gasoline for a vehicle every week, or we buy the same brand of coffee, or we buy the same brand of milk, then we know what, since we've purchased that product before, we know how the product is going to perform, and we don't have we have less perceived risk by buying things that we're already familiar with. And secondly, when we buy branded products, it reduces the amount of shopping time we need to spend to find the product. I buy gasoline at the same gas station all the time because I've never had any problems with the gas from that gas station before. So why would I go out and risk something different? Why would I go shopping around town when I know I'm going to get a reliable product on the basis of the particular brand? And so lots of companies market their products on the basis of the brands that they've instilled in us. Banks, for example, telephone companies, vehicle companies, clothing companies. We buy lots of products on the basis of brand, and we become loyal to these brands. However, the book also mentions that the mere fact that a vendor, a merchant has established brand loyalty doesn't mean that brand loyalty is permanent, because marketers have to continually take initiatives to make the brand relevant to consumers. And every now and then you'll hear about a company that's in the process of rejuvenating a brand because it's kind of people have taken it for granted, competitors have come along, and they need to find a new way to make their product appealing to people, so they rejuvenate the brand. A good example is McDonald's. A number of years ago, they were a family restaurant, and then they noticed that in the United States, Starbucks, the big American coffee company, was selling a lot of coffee. And so McDonald's rebranded themselves as a coffee destination, and so they've got their restaurants called McCafe, or I don't know how to pronounce it, that are really fancy coffee kiosks. And it's because they're competing against Starbucks. And so McDonald's is in the process of sort of rebranding itself as more of a coffee destination rather than a family restaurant. The family restaurant aspect of McDonald's appealed to families with young kids, but the McCafe restaurant has nothing to do with kids. They're trying to sell coffee to people on their way to work in the morning or at lunch hour. Anyway, so McDonald's is engaged in some rebranding in recent years. Okay, so the next psychological, sort of the fifth psychological influence on the consumer purchase decision process is the influence of our values, beliefs, and attitudes. So values are these enduring personal and socially preferable types of conduct. Beliefs are our subjective perception of how a product performs on different attributes. So an example, people used to believe that McDonald's had lame coffee, at least compared to Starbucks. And so McDonald's, in their rebranding effort, they made a concerted effort to change people's beliefs about the quality of coffee at McDonald's. And then we also know that attitudes also influence or can also influence our purchase decisions. So attitudes are predisposed responses to products or product classes in a favorable or an unfavorable way. So, if you're a smoker, you probably have attitudes towards different brands of cigarettes. You have your favorite brand that you are disposed towards purchasing, and there's some other brands that you stay away from. Those are attitudes. And we have similar kind of attitudes towards vehicles, types of alcoholic beverages, like you might have your favorite kind of wine or favorite kind of beer. Those are kind of attitudes. And then we know that sometimes marketers try to change our attitudes towards their products, either by promoting the product features more, or changing the importance of some of those product features, or by adding new features to the product. And there's an example of that in the book of a toothpaste company, Colgate, adding something to one of its toothpastes to make it seem more appealing to buyers. Oh, they added something to make it, or they started highlighting the gum fighting disease aspect of their toothpaste. Okay, so the final psychological factor that can influence the consumer purchase decision process is lifestyles. So lifestyle is our self-perceived image about, or self-perceived life image about our view of the world, what is important, and how we should spend our time and resources. And the analysis of lifestyles is known as psychographics. And psychographics is a combination of demographics and psychology. So I'm just going to point out here that the psychographics is only used in consumer marketing. It's not used in organizational marketing or industrial marketing. Psychographics only deals with consumer products. And we'll come back to that in Chapter 6. So the book has a link to a website, and it's this company called Prism, PRIZM C2, or the website is called environicsanalytics.ca. Anyways, if you go to this website, this Environics Analytics, that's how to pronounce it, Environics Analytics. Analytics.ca. If you go to this website, you can punch in your postal code, and it'll spit back a psychographic profile of your neighborhood. And I would encourage you to try this, because it's kind of fun to see whether or not their profile of your neighborhood matches what you have in mind about the people in your neighborhood. We've done this in class a number of times, and I remember doing it for my neighborhood a couple of years ago, and I thought it was, somewhat accurate. It might not have been perfectly accurate, but I thought it was pretty good, and it's kind of fun. Okay, so the final section of Chapter 5 deals with the socio-cultural influences on the consumer purchase decision process. And just as with the psychological influences, we also have, which had 6 sub-factors. There are also 6 sociocultural sub-factors that influence consumer purchase decision process. We have the influence of, personal influence. We have reference groups. We have family influence. We have social class. We have culture, and we have subculture. Sorry for my bad handwriting, but anyways. So we're going to walk through each of these 6 types of social cultural influences on the consumer purchase decision process. So the first influence is personal influence, and we have 2 aspects. One is opinion leadership, and the other is word of mouth. So opinion leadership is where the marketer uses a well-known personality as the pitch man or the pitch person for the product. So the person appears to be knowledgeable about the product, and we, the consumers, follow the lead of the leader's consumption pattern. So we see this in the media in advertising all the time. And so I have a fun example here. I might not, I thought about it in hindsight. Maybe it doesn't mean as much to you students because you're younger than me. But what the heck, I thought I'd try. So there's a company in the United States called Priceline. They sell vacation packages, and their pitchman is a fellow by the name of William Shatner. And William Shatner used to be one of the stars in the Star Trek movie, or Star Trek television series when I was a kid. And he's still alive, which I find hard to believe. But anyways, he's their pitchman. Why is he selling travel products? Well, you know, he lived on this Starship Enterprise and traveled through the universe, so presumably he knows something about traveling, and he's a good person to sell vacation packages for Priceline. Okay. So then we have word of mouth. Advertising. So marketers recognize that word of mouth is the most influential form of promotion, and the reason it's the most effective form of promotion, and the reason it's the most effective form of promotion is because there's no cost to the marketer. And when we receive testimonials from our friends and people that we trust, our neighbors and people that we trust, it tends to have a high influence on our purchase decision. So sometimes marketers, they try to take advantage of this. In their advertisements, they try to use humor or music or slogans. They'll use these well-known personalities in their ads, because what they're trying to do is, in part, they're not trying to entertain us. They're trying to get us to start talking about their ads with our colleagues and friends so that they get some free word-of-mouth advertising. Okay, so we have 2 flavors of word-of-mouth advertising. One is buzz marketing. So buzz marketing is simply another name of word-of-mouth advertising. And viral marketing is simply word-of-mouth advertising on the internet. It's just word-of-mouth. It's just word-of-mouth advertising that takes place over the internet. So social media, emails, that kind of stuff. Okay. So the second social cultural influence on the consumer purchase decision process is the influence of these so-called reference groups. So reference groups are the groups that we feel we're a member of, and they kind of set personal standards for our purchasing behavior. And so we have these 3 different reference groups that we can belong to. We have a membership group, so these are groups that we actively participate in, like our families, associations, clubs, teams. You'll notice that probably a good deal of your brand preferences are the ones that you inherited from your parents. We tend because their parents influence our purchasing decisions. Then we have these aspiration groups. So these are groups that we want to become a member of. And, we sometimes see this amongst students. Sometimes, students, they want to become an accountant. And even though they're only a student, they start dressing like an accountant. But that's because a group of accountants is their aspirational group. And so if accountants get a certain brand of calculator, they wear a certain color of tie or a certain color of suit or brand of shoes, then students tend to follow suit. And then the third kind of group that we can belong to are groups or disassociative groups. So these are groups that we want to get out of. They're groups that we want to disassociate ourselves from. So, for example, we might live in a neighborhood that's not particularly appealing, and so we have lots of bad behavior in our neighborhood, so we want to distance ourselves from that kind of behavior. So the influence of that group is kind of a reverse influence on us. We do the opposite of what they do. Okay, then the third social-cultural influence on the consumer decision purchase process is the influence of families. So we have three aspects of family influence on the consumer purchase decision process. We have consumer socialization. So this is kids acquiring their skills and attitudes and knowledge about how to be a consumer when we're kids. Kids tend to emulate what their parents do. So if your parents like to use Tide soap and Crest toothpaste and whatever, your parents went to the TD Bank, well, you probably have a preference to follow similar consumption patterns. And then kids can also learn the consumption patterns through their own direct purchase and use of products. And marketers often try to target their advertisements at children because they're trying to develop a brand loyalty at a very young age. So we'll hold that loyalty with us throughout our lifetimes. Okay, then another component of family influence is the family decision-making process. I should change the order of these. Oops. Is the family decision-making process. And the book describes two different processes. One, we have a spousal dominant process where one spouse kind of takes the lead in deciding to buy something. And so the book tells us that in families, often it's the wives that have the most influence over the purchase of food, children's toys, and clothing, whereas husbands tend to have the most influence in the purchase of vehicle maintenance and purchase of homes. And I have a brief example of this, of changing consumption patterns. Harley Davidson motorcycles have traditionally been purchased by men, and the male market has more or less been exhausted. So Harley Davidson is now focusing their marketing on women. So there's a woman. This is from the Harley Davidson website. And how do they do that? Well, they do that by helping women buy Harley Davidson products. So they can help you, if you're a woman, that is, they can help you find the right motorcycle for you. They can help you learn how to ride one of their bikes because their motorcycles are quite large and heavy. They can help you learn how to buy appropriate clothing. And as part of we said before that women like to do more social networking during the purchase process. When they're buying vehicles, they go out and see what's available, then they talk to their friends and relatives about, their colleagues about what's worked for them. So Harley Davidson is going to use the same marketing technique for motorcycles for women. They have these marketing evenings called quote-unquote garage parties, where they invite a bunch of women to a Harley Davidson shop, in the evening, and it's only open to women, so women can ask salespeople questions, and they can talk to each other, and so on. So in this case, Harley Davidson has realized that for expensive consumer goods like expensive motorcycles, women make their own decisions, um, and when it comes to buying their own bikes, and therefore Harley Davidson is uh, orienting their marketing towards women. Okay. So we have these two decision-making models in families. We have spouse dominant, and then we have joint decision-making. So there are some decisions that spouses make together. So examples from the book are in the purchase of home appliances, purchase of vacations, purchase of medical care. Both parents tend to be involved in those kind of decisions. And then the book also talks about in a family with children, you can have all these different roles in the family during the purchase process. So you might have somebody who plays the role of an information gatherer. You can have the role of some influencers. There'll be a decision maker. There'll be a purchaser. There'll be a user, and these can all be different members of the family. The reason I'm kind of highlighting this now is because we're going to come back to the same concept in Chapter 6 when we're talking about the purchase process in organizations or industry. And so we kind of recognize for the students that have kids, or if you've been a kid in the not too distant past, we have this concept of pester power. So pester power is where kids pester their parents to buy stuff for the kids. The kids don't have the money. The kids are not the purchaser. The kids are not the decision maker, but the kids are information gatherers and influencers over the actual decision maker. Okay, and then the third family influence factor in the consumer purchase decision process is the family life cycle. This is the family life cycle. Okay, so this is pretty hard to see in the screen, but so you'll have to see it in the book. But we just happen to buy different types of products at different stages of our life cycle. There's no surprise there. When we're young, parents tend to buy us clothes and toys. And then as we grow older, we tend to buy more clothes. So here we're in our youth. Here we're young adult. We get married. So the traditional family life cycle is we're born, we go to school. Once you're to school, you get a job, you get married, you have kids. Kids leave home, and then you retire. And so at each stage of the life cycle, we buy different stuff. Kids, clothes and toys are purchased for kids. Young families buy houses and furniture. As we grow older, you spend more on recreation, and then when you're at retirement age, you spend more on medical services. So that's kind of the traditional family life cycle. But of course, we know that. Just before we get to that, so the concept of household formation, like this stage of life when we buy a house or a condo and we buy furniture. This is an important economic stage in our life cycle, because when we're in the household formation stage, we're meeting up with a spouse and having kids, buying houses and furniture, vehicles, appliances. These are all expensive items. So economists and marketers like to keep an eye on the rate of household formation, because if you buy a house, you buy a new house, you're going to have to buy appliances. You buy a used house, you're going to have to buy some renovation materials. And so marketers like to keep an eye on the rate of household formation. So we have this traditional family life cycle, dual parent families, but of course we know that nowadays we have all sorts of different configurations of families. When you're after you've left your teenage years, maybe you'll get married, maybe have kids, but maybe you'll get married, but you won't have kids, or maybe you'll get married and you have kids, or you don't have kids, but maybe you'll get divorced, and then maybe you'll get remarried, or you won't get married, but you still have a spouse. So those all these different variations on families or the family on family formation. So I have some stats here, kind of diagramming this change in family patterns in recent decades. So this information comes from Stats Canada. So I mean, it's a little bit dated from 1981. So it's about the last 25 years. So the number of married couples has been in a decline over the last few decades. The number of couples living common law has been increasing, and the number of single parent families has also been increasing. And then, whoops. Okay, when we look at the number of common law families, we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of common law families across the board. So this is Canada as a whole. Big increase in the number of common law families, particularly large in Quebec and up north, Yukon and Northwest Territories. So if you have common law families and you want to sell wedding packages, well, you're not going to make a whole lot of sales in Quebec. Anyways, okay, and then also when we factor in kids into the picture, so this time it's families with children. Again, over the last couple of decades, we've seen this decline in the number of married couples with children. We have an increase in the number of common law married couples with children, and then we have single parent families, so one parent with children, also on the increase. Okay, then the final page in chapter 5 deals with okay, the three remaining sociocultural influences on the consumer purchase decision process, the role of social class, culture, and subculture. Okay, so social class, the book describes it as a semi-permanent societal standings, kind of based on occupations, income, or education. And traditionally, we classify society into low class, middle class, and upper class. But we're Canadians, and Canadians are like Americans in that our societies do not have very strong class systems. Most North Americans see themselves or view themselves as middle class as opposed to lower class or upper class. And the reason we see ourselves as middle class is because it's part of the North American culture that our economic destiny is determined by our work and not by the class we're born into. In North America, we tend to have more social mobility up and down the social class scale than in some other countries. There's more of a class system in England, in France, in Japan than there is in Canada, or in North America, I should say. So I got a very good example. A very good example of the lack of economic class in North America, and this is an example that I suspect most of you will recognize. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey is an American, and when she was young, she lived in great poverty. Had to wear potato sacks to school, but 5 decades later, she is a billionaire. We all know that Oprah Winfrey is a very famous and affluent television talk show host. But here's just an example that economic class, she was born into a poor economic class, that did not hurt her economic aspirations. Uh, and it's just illustrating that economic class is not very strong in North America. Okay. Okay, so the next socio-cultural influence on the consumer purchase decision process is through culture. And culture is the set of values and ideas and attitudes accepted by a group of people and are kind of passed down to the next generation. And so I have two little examples here of the influence of culture on our purchase decision process. So, as a Canadian, you may find this difficult to believe, and I found it difficult to believe when I first heard it myself as well. You may find it difficult to believe, but not everybody actually likes peanut butter. Peanut butter is an American food. Canadians like peanut butter. Americans like peanut butter, but lots of countries around the world, they don't like peanut butter. I find that hard to believe, but they don't eat peanut butter because they're not Americans. So where don't people eat peanut butter? Europe. The average European eats less than 1 tablespoon of peanut butter per year, whereas Americans eat more than 1 billion pounds. So Americans eat more than 3 pounds, or that's like 1.5 kilograms of peanut butter per year per person. And in Europe, they only eat like 1 tablespoon. My point is, our taste for a food like peanut butter is culturally determined. We're peanut butter eaters. We're not whatever they eat in Europe for snacks on their toast in the morning. I don't know what they eat. Anyway, so these are countries that where peanut butter is not part of their culture: France, Italy, England, Spain, Russia, China, not exactly in Europe, but Sweden, Czech Republic, Argentina, again, not exactly in Europe, but and Denmark. They're not peanut butter. It's not part of their culture. Okay, then the second example of a cultural influence on our purchasing patterns. I've loaded a brief video to Moodle about. Well, I'm not going to tell you what it's about. I'll let you watch it. It's only 2.5. It's less than 3 minutes long, so you have to watch it yourself. Anyways, the video is called Lucky Ironfish, but you'll see quite quickly that there's a very strong cultural influence leading to the consumption of the product highlighted in this brief video. So I'll let you watch that, and I'll give you a heads up. It's a very heartwarming video. It won't quite have you in tears, but it's quite heartwarming. Okay, and then the final sociocultural influence is on the consumer purchase decision process is so-called subcultures. So subcultures, it's a cultural influence, but it's a culture that's shared amongst smaller groups in society. And we can have all these different types of subcultures. We can have them based on age cohort. So we talk about the baby boomers and Generation X and the millennials. Those are kind of age cohorts, and they have their own cultural preferences. We have cultural preferences by geographic region. In Canada, we have Maritimers, Central Canada, Western Canada, and the left coast, otherwise known as BC. And we have different ethnic groups in Canada as well that have their own culturally preferred products as well. And some of the larger Canadian subcultures that the book mentions are obviously the French culture in Quebec. They have a different language, they have different law, they have different history than the rest of the country. And there's also French-speaking people in the Maritimes known as the Acadians. We also have large ethnic Chinese populations in some of our larger cities like Toronto and Vancouver, and I think even Edmonton has a fairly large Chinese population. And Chinese people as a whole, kind of stereotyping here, but they tend to be affluent and well-educated, and they have different attitudes towards education than Westerners. And then another large subculture in Canada is the Aboriginal population across the country as well. Okay, so that's it for chapter 5, and then next chapter is going to be chapter 6, dealing with the purchase process used by organizations, otherwise known as industrial buyers or organizational buyers. Anyways, that's it for chapter 5, and we'll talk to you later.